The Convention on Business Integrity, in collaboration with its partners, hosted the 4th edition of its regulatory conversations, which focused on the theme, Foreign Exchange Restrictions on Food Imports and Implication for Regulating and Growing the Economy. It brought together members of the organized private sector, government officials, regulatory agencies, and civil society groups. Mr. Soji Apampa, the CEO of Convention on Business Integrity, set the tone for the discourse.
According to the central bank, and I'm going to use milk imports as a placeholder for the whole story about food imports and the restriction of foreign exchange for food imports. We've been told that about $1.2 billion is spent annually. $1.2 billion on forex imports, for dairy imports. There are two schools of thought. Number one, school one. This action by the central bank will lead to dairy companies backwardly integrating their value chains, and that it will improve market access for herdsmen and also reduction in the farmer-herdsman clashes. It also states that there will be creation of more jobs and the foreign exchange being put out by the central bank, at least 1.2 billion will be saved. That's one school of thought. The second school of thought is saying that this action of the central bank is going to lead to accentuated pain for the poor. Because there are no palliative measures or remedies that are in sight. And secondly, that it will lead to super profits for special interest groups who are suspected to have captured this sort of regulation. So today is all about debating the two sides. The real story is that milk is being imported into Nigeria, not in liquid form, because liquid form is 88% water. So it's powdered milk that everybody is importing, really. That's the biggest item. In order to have a powdered milk factory in Nigeria, your backward integration must produce 1 million liters of milk a day, minimum, for a modest-sized powdered milk factory to be sustainable.
And according to UNICEF, protein-energy malnutrition is a common nutritional disorder found in under fives in Nigeria, contributing to stunting and wasting and increases the risk of infection and leads to many deaths. In Nigeria, up to 70,000 children die a year as a result of this serious malnutrition. Typically, 60 to 80% of the cost of producing the proteins is in the feeds. So agriculture is central to what needs to happen in order for our populations to be more healthy. If you look at what School of Thought B is saying, is that there will be super profits for special interests because we have allocative inefficiencies. Subsidy for petroleum products is 12.5 billion this year. And this government had said it was not going to invest in subsidy program, but we have continued the petroleum subsidy up to the tune of 12.5 billion. I wonder how much that is in, that may be approximately about 4 trillion naira that we're spending. Hajj and Jerusalem pilgrims also swallow their own just under 1 billion. The AMCON hole that we're facing is about 18 billion big. $18 billion, 6.5 trillion, and it's owed by the super rich. Tax and import duty waivers to the super rich also came to about 2.8 billion over the period 2011 to 2015. Some of the beneficiaries of waivers and these other exemptions are the same ones who now want to be the big players in food production. The same ones who are the big players in agriculture today. So which way do you think that the policy of the CBN is going to go? Who is going to be the main beneficiary? Is it the poor that are going to carry the extra cost that will come from the companies looking for forex from other sources? Or will it be the super rich who will always get their forex anyway from the central bank at CBN rates?
The event featured a robust panel session moderated by Mr. Lufemi Awemi, chairman of Proshare, and was an opportunity for experts to examine the FX restrictions by the Central Bank of Nigeria on food imports and the impact on the economy.
We have an issue here, and the issue is one where government, or at least the central bank, believes that we should be producing more milk locally. And I think that's just as good. But you would then ask yourself, before you get to the point of seeking to produce more milk locally, are you able to produce more milk locally? Are you able to do it cost effectively? Is that the best way to move the nation forward? Perhaps yes. What I have a problem with, and that for me speaks to the last slide that Soji presented. He asked one question around the communication. Has it been honest? Was there any consultation? Is the policy flexible enough, given that if you were here and you listened to Soji's presentation, we're talking about some very, very vulnerable part of society. I believe the policy is not flexible enough. There ought to be a graduation over a number of years, giving people time to make the investment, because we're talking about private sector investment here. People will need to do feasibility studies. They will need to look at the entire value chain so they can position themselves. They will need to look at things around packaging. They will need to then raise capital. You can't do that. Surely they haven't been given time to do that. And so my submission is, there is a lot that is wrong with this policy.
If we have a clear national strategy that says, look, we want to become global leaders in this 1, 2, 3, we can do isolated industrial policy to those areas on which our endowments allow us to become competitive globally and to dominate that value chain. We can then say, okay, in these particular industries, we'll protect them in these ways that will lead to these kind of outcomes in X number of years, and then will make us dominant free traders on those value chains. That's what is now called latent comparative advantage in structural economics. If you just say, oh, yeah, okay, we put ban on this, put ban on that, you just get these games on foreign exchange for those who are extracting rent and all kinds of things, and it never eventually gets us quite anywhere. So I think that's a very important thing to consider in this. The other point I think that is critical to make is that I have argued for a long time that the biggest risk to doing business in Nigeria is regulatory risk. A regulator is more likely to kill a company than any market risk is likely to do in Nigeria. I'm on record, I can prove it. I'm giving a paper on that in Rome next month. Regulatory risk is the biggest risk of doing business in Nigeria. I can show systematically sectors of economy that have been wiped out by an unthinking regulator acting.
There are too many regulations because this is about milk. But actually, the bigger issue is the quality of the regulatory environment and the damage it is doing to this economy. Because when we have this kind of regulatory environment, what happens is that you shrink those who are doing business ethically, they begin to go extinct, and you expand the scope of the informal sector, where there are no rules, no tax, nothing is paid, no compliance with any regulation. That is what is happening. And unfortunately, we don't seem to even learn from the failure of this kind of model of economic management.
Mr. Soji Apampa, Mr. Muda Yusuf, Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and Mr. Olusegun Osundipe of the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria speak further on the subject of discourse.
It's not just about milk. It's about practically all the products that are on that list. And what we like to see, and that is even the consensus of this forum, is that there should be a lot more engagement before such policies are put in place. But now that we have the policy, there could still be an engagement in order to fine-tune the policy.
On the positive side, the intention seems good. But when you look at what the impact would be on the negative side, it is obviously too huge to be compared with the anticipated gain or objective in the future. And when you consider the fragile growth that the economy is currently experiencing and other issues like unemployment, high unemployment rates, and other problems that we are currently facing, health issue, the issue of nutrition, very low level of nutrition affecting many citizens. We think the bottom line really is there's need for government to have a rethink on this policy. Call the stakeholders together and jointly work together to develop a roadmap, an implementation roadmap that would, number one, allow room, a kind of moratorium of maybe say between 2 or 3 years for people, operators to be able to put their acts together and begin to plan the process of implementation. It took the Dutch over 140 years to become self-sufficient in production of milk and dairy products. So we can't do that overnight.
One of the key takeaways, of course, from the private sector is that there has to be a lot more consultation. As I said, it's not about milk. It's not about food. It's about the fact that we're short of forex. So we should discuss that core issue and come to a proper conclusion on how best to conserve the foreign exchange that we do have. Another takeaway from today is that the philosophy of regulation is very unclear in Nigeria. Regulators seem to stumble over each other. They seem to be a little mistrusting of each other, a lot of turf protection going on. But in the meantime, many people are getting hurt that they do not intend to hurt. For instance, Nigeria has 11 million stunted children between the ages of 0 and 5 from poor water and sanitation and hygiene on the one hand, and poor nutrition on the other hand. So when what you are attacking, in quotes, is milk, the basic things that they're even struggling to pay for, then you put it even further out of the reach of those children. And Nigeria is the second worst hit in the whole world, behind India. And after Nigeria comes Indonesia, China, big countries like that. So I think that our regulators need to think a bit more deeply and put a bit more rigor into the policy formulation process so that we don't have unintended consequences.
With a communique expected from the Regulatory Conversations 4.0, the major takeaway from the forum is the need for the Central Bank of Nigeria to adopt broad stakeholder engagement before taking key policy decisions, and also reducing its foray into the fiscal and trade policy space.